Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Kilgore, and today I will be presenting on the topic of the global response on the COVID-19 pandemic. The country that I have chosen to represent this response is Norway. Let's get started. The country that I have chosen to present about is Norway. I decided to choose Norway because they have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic in a much different way than the United States has. I did not want to highlight a country that did not do all that it could have done to prevent this virus spreading the way that it has, because that reminds me too much of the way the United States has handled this pandemic. Instead, I chose a country that I believe made much better decisions overall in their response to COVID-19. As of May 25th, 2020, Norway has reported about 8,360 confirmed cases, with 7,727 people recovering and only 235 deaths. This is incredibly low compared to most countries, especially considering the fact that one of their neighboring countries, Sweden, has had a much different outcome so far. I was curious to find out why they were not nearly as affected in terms of mortality rates compared to other countries, such as the United States, which has now seen almost 100,000 deaths due to this virus. The way the Norwegian Prime Minister has handled this pandemic is admirable, because she has properly protected her citizens and implemented certain restrictions that have been proven to be successful. Many leaders around the world, including our own here in the United States, should learn from what Prime Minister Erna Solberg has done, since she has done a great job dealing with a situation such as this one. There are currently 5,416,813 people living in Norway. 83% of the entire population lives in urban areas, which rounds up to almost 4.5 million people living in the cities. They live mostly in the southern region of the country to avoid harsh weather and to be closer to mainland Europe. Over 1 million people reside in Oslo, the capital, at the moment. The other 17% of the population lives in rural areas near the coastlines. Only 17% of the population consists of people over the age of 65, while those that are between the ages of 25 to 54 make up 40.75% of the population. The life expectancy in Norway for men and women combined is 82.1 years, with women expected to live a bit longer at 84.4 years and men at 80 years. The average household income is 35,725 US dollars, and this average is lower than the income of Norwegians in their early 30s, with their average income being 56,200 US dollars. 74% of people between the ages of 15 to 64 are employed, and the unemployment rate is 9.4% for the ages between 15 and 29, which is lower than most European countries, with an average of 13.9%. 82% of those between the ages of 25 to 64 completed their upper secondary education, which is just another term for high school. The average household in Norway contains only 2 people, and most adults cohabitate instead of getting married. The first confirmed case in Norway was announced on February 26, 2020. 2 weeks later, a lockdown was placed on the Norwegian public on March 12th, which is earlier than when other countries, including the United States, decided to implement restrictions. Schools, restaurants, gyms, and tourist sites were closed, while cultural events were canceled and postponed until further notice. Those without Norwegian citizenship were banned from entering the country, and domestic travel was discouraged unless it was considered absolutely necessary. The restrictions that were placed on Norwegians are some of the most strict restrictions Norway has ever been put under, aside from times of war. The Norwegian Prime Minister, Erna Solberg, loosened restrictions on lockdown on April 13th, and primary schools were reopened at that time. Secondary schools were not opened until May 11th. Residents are still working from home as of now, with no update on when they may be able to return to work in person. Some small businesses have been allowed to reopen, but most businesses are still closed. Major events like sports have been canceled until mid June. Travel restrictions are still in place for tourists and will stay that way until August 20th. Citizens that belong to the European Economic Area, also known as the EEA, have recently been granted permission to travel to Norway again. As of May 25th, 2020, the number of cases in Norway is about 8,360, with 234,637 people having been tested so far. 41 people are currently still hospitalized due to the virus, and 14 of those 41 are being monitored in intensive care at the moment. The recovery number is 7,727, and the number of deaths is 235. The majority of the people that have passed away from the virus in Norway are between the ages of 80 and 89, with those being 90 plus coming in second. Only 2 people that died were between the ages of 40 to 49, and no reports currently have been made on anyone being younger than that dying. Prime Minister Solberg has stated that while restrictions have been loosened compared to what they were, Norwegians should not let their guard down during this time. If people do decide to leave the country, they must self-quarantine for at least 10 days, which has been reduced from the previous 14 days. Social distancing is still required, and public gatherings are able to have up to 50 people in the space, although private gatherings are now able to hold 20 people as long as they stay at least 3 feet apart at all times. Testing was done on a large amount of the population, regardless of whether they were showing symptoms or not, unlike here in the United States where you must have greater than mild symptoms to get tested. Hand hygiene, such as hand washing and hand sanitizer use, was encouraged more than usual, and people were told to avoid handshaking and hugging as much as possible. The government recommended that citizens should do their best to avoid public transportation as much as possible during this time. Social distancing was enforced at the beginning of the lockdown in March, and as of now, it is currently still being enforced even as the restrictions are being lifted. One thing they have done differently than the United States is that people were still encouraged to visit their doctor if they felt the need to do so, regardless of showing symptoms or not. I read in an article written by The Nation that Norway is not chaotic and Norwegians are not desperate, and that probably has helped their situation immensely. On top of that, the citizens actually listen to their government, which also helps. Norway has been assisting migrants by providing them with the appropriate health care and clean water. Norway currently has certain measures in place for people with substance use disorders. They are aware of the fact that people with substance use disorders also suffer from chronic diseases such as cardiovascular and lung diseases. The opioid agonist treatment mainly consists of people aged 50 and over, which makes them even more vulnerable than they already were. The focus has specifically been on those that show respiratory symptoms more than the ones that don't. Plans have been made for opioid agonist treatment patients and whether or not they can take their medication at care centers or use home care services. They have prepared to make sure that the sufficient amount of medication is available, and the staff working with these patients have been notified on how to deal with them during this stressful time. People aged 65 and over are vulnerable to the virus. Unfortunately, they are being reported as consisting of the majority of COVID-19 deaths in Norway right now. They currently make up almost 83% of the reported deaths. The response in Norway was very equitable because the restrictions placed on the country was enforced on everyone. All Norwegian counties were following the restrictions, not some doing one thing and some doing another. Everyone is on one accord there, which is to try to keep case numbers low and mortality rates low as well. Social determinants of health do play a role here because Norwegians consistently report a better quality of life compared to other countries around the world. Norway has universal health care, extremely low costs for education, complete unemployment compensation, affordable housing, and public transportation. All of the topics listed here are components of the social determinants of health. And to conclude this presentation, here is where you can find all of the resources that I used to include all of the information presented in this PowerPoint. I would like to take this time to apologize for any background noise that might have been picked up by my microphone. I do not live alone, and it is hard to record in silence when you live with other people. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.